message board. So, Vince, let's talk about the college football playoff. First ranking comes out tonight, 7:30 ESPN. We're going to have the show afterwards. This is going to be one of the more intriguing initial first fours and really first 6 or 7s in a long time, because I feel like most years we kind of have an idea of who the top 4 is going to be. I think there's a lot more debate to be had this year than there had in the past. And so we're going to kind of give our rankings of what we think they'll be. We're going to then discuss where we think Notre Dame should be and kind of Notre Dame's realistic chances of whether or not Notre Dame actually has a chance to make it. And we will discuss why we think they do, what needs to happen, and then go from there. And Vince, to start off with, to me, there are really 4 teams. There's only 4 teams that can control their own destiny, in my opinion. That is Georgia, Oklahoma, Michigan State, and Alabama. The reason I say Alabama is because they have a loss, but if Alabama wins out, including beating Georgia in the SEC title game, they're in.
Right? No question.
They're in. Now, where Alabama doesn't control their own destiny anymore is they if they would have gone 12-0 and lost to Georgia in a close game in the SEC title game, they probably still get in. Now they're in an elimination mode. They can't afford to lose again. Alabama's I think they've got actually a challenging schedule remaining, and we'll dive into that a little bit later. But I think those 4 teams, to me,
that makes sense,
are teams that control their own destiny. And then after that, you've got a group of Oregon, Ohio, and the reason I didn't include Cincinnati in that group because I'm curious to see where Cincinnati is ranked today.
And if they're low enough, they don't control their own destiny. I mean, the only destiny that is not controlled by them is what the college football playoff does to them. It's nothing on the field necessarily for them.
It's not a given that if they are in the top 4 tonight, they stay there because they don't play anybody. I mean, they are literally building their entire resume around beating Notre Dame in early October. Correct. Because this is a down year in the AAC, in my opinion. SMU and Houston are decent, but neither of them are. It's not like you beat a UCF from the past or what Memphis has been in past years, right? Memphis is down, UCF is down. They're going to build it around Notre Dame. And so when I look at resumes, when I look at Cincinnati, they're 8-0. They're 2-0 against teams with a plus 500 record, which is good. Notre Dame is they've got one of the better wins on the schedule.
No doubt.
But when I look in Cincinnati, the committee and the things the committee looks at, strength of schedule, they've beaten UCF and Notre Dame. It's the only 2 teams they've beat with a winning record. Their opponent record's 24-32. Do you know who has the best opponent record? Like whose opponents have the best record?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
Yeah. Notre Dame's 2. Notre Dame's 2. Michigan.
Really?
Michigan, 38-27.
Wow.
Yeah. So of the 12 teams, because Vince and I think there's 12 teams that have a chance to be in the college football playoff.
Right.
Michigan has the best. Notre Dame has the second best. Georgia has the third best. When you look at
when it's
Michigan's
all said and
opponents
done, those are going to change, I would imagine.
Well, if Michigan wins out, it's going to be really good because they still have to play Penn State and Ohio State. So if Michigan wins out, it's going to get even better.
That's true.
But so to me, Cincinnati is still feasting on that Notre Dame win, but they've had a lot of ugly wins against kind of mediocre teams, in my opinion.
Right.
And I think that's going to ding them a little bit. They haven't been they got outplayed by Indiana for a lot of that game. Yeah, they did. They played poorly against Navy. They played poorly against Tulane. Cincinnati is just not a team to me that is really impressed, in my opinion. And I've talked about this, and their schedule is, they've tried their best to schedule to be a playoff team. I don't fault them. It's not their fault that UCF is down. It's not their fault that Memphis is down. It's not their, and they don't have Memphis on the regular.
was a darling for people.
If IU was as good as people thought they were at the beginning of the year, we'd be if UCF and Indiana were as good as they normally for UCF as good as they've normally been, and for Indiana as good as people thought they were going to be.
Right,
we're having a completely different discussion about an 8-0 Cincinnati team.
No doubt, I completely agree with that. I think, and my issue, and I think this is what the committee does look at. They don't just look at wins, losses. They look at how you won games. And by the way, I will put this out there that could hurt Notre Dame a little bit as well. But I think, like you had mentioned, their games against Navy, Tulane, have just been, you know what I mean? Yes, they've won the games. That's the most important thing. I get it. But the committee looks at how you win the games, too.
And they were tied at halftime 7-7 against Murray State.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's the thing I like about the committee compared to most pollsters just look at a final score and say, "Oh, gee, that's the final score."
Right.
Right.
And now
Now
you could spin it. You could spin it to they're a second half team. They
sure.
are,
they should
they
need
can
to be a
rally
second half team
around.
against Murray State.
Absolutely
Right?
agree with you. Or
thing.
Tulane, for that matter, or Navy,
who's
I
1-7. Right.
Yeah.
Navy's 2-6. That's
Right.
that's kind of the point. Now, the other team that I did not list as controlling their own destiny because of, in my opinion, of what's in front of them is Wake Forest.
Yeah.
And I think, and the reason I say that is because Georgia, Oklahoma, and Michigan State, if they went out and undefeated, they're in over Wake Forest no matter what.
Correct.
If Cincinnati wins out, I believe Cincinnati will also be in over Wake Forest.
Yeah.
So, because again, Georgia knocks out Bama, right? And so then you've got that fourth spot is up for grabs. I also feel like if Ohio State went, I mean, that to me, yes, it's impressive that Wake Forest went undefeated. I've actually changed my stance. I said a couple weeks ago, if Wake Forest wins out, they're in the playoff. I don't know if that's necessarily true now.
It would be interesting because they'd be the ACC champs. They would have won the ACC championship.
Right.
And so you're talking about an ACC champ versus an American champ.
Right.
But
or a one-loss Pac-12 champ or a one-loss
Big Ten champ. Right. So that would be an interesting debate, I think, going into that final.
Yeah.
Well, to see where they've been ranking them the whole time.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get a lot of questions answered tonight based on what the college football committee thinks of these teams. But I think that would be a heck of a debate if you're talking about a one-loss Pac-12, a one-loss Big Ten, an undefeated ACC, and an undefeated American. I think that there's a debate there.
Big debate.
You know what I mean?
Well, and normally I would say that because here's the thing: the committee has dinged Clemson in the past for playing when they've played bad ACC schedules, and it's not Clemson's fault. The ACC sucks.
Right.
The difference this year, however, is Clemson would always have like a really big non-conference win. They'd play Auburn, they'd play Georgia, they'd play, Clemson would always play Notre Dame last year. They always played. Whereas when I look at Wake Forest's non-conference schedule this year, it's Old Dominion, Norfolk State, Army, and I'm missing somebody. No, that's it. Old Dominion, Norfolk State, and Army. That's their non-conference slate. So, one company we will not be having on as advertisers is Jimmy John's. My wife ordered it like an hour ago, and it just now showed up. I'm thinking like, hey, get Jimmy. It's literally, Vince, you know where it's at. It's like a mile and a half away from our house.
Right.
And like the freaky fast, like what the heck? Like, did everybody in Granger order Jimmy John's today, and we fell at the end of the list?
That was just funny.
Yeah,
add some levity.
Tommy Guns with a super chat. Thank you for that, Tommy. Says, for all the talk about the first G5 team, that's a group of 5 team getting in, I wouldn't be at all surprised if this is the year that a 2-loss team gets in. Should Bama lose a 1 or 2 point game to Georgia, I could see it. A 2-loss Bama team's not getting in over an undefeated Cincinnati team.
I agree with that.
No
too.
way.
There's just no way that you can justify that.
No. I think they would like to have a group of 5 team in, but it's got to be a legitimate in. They're not getting in over They're not getting in over an undefeated. Alabama's not getting in over an undefeated Wake Forest team. The problem for Wake Forest, back to Wake Forest, was they're not going to beat a ranked team most likely.
Yeah,
I mean, right now they're hanging their hat on a win over 6-3 Virginia and an Army. You look at the rest of their schedule because they don't play Pitt, right? Now they would get Pitt potentially in the ACC championship, but that a game against Pitt's not looking all that good now either, because Pitt got beat this weekend at home by Miami. They've got at North Carolina left, home against NC State, at Clemson, and at BC. Now, the win over North Carolina wouldn't be that good because that would drop North Carolina to 4-5, right? NC State is 6-2 right now, but NC State plays at Florida State this weekend, and then at Wake Forest, and home against Syracuse, and home against North Carolina. I mean, when you're looking at your resume at Wake Forest, and one of your 3 big wins is a 70-56 win over Army, and then another one is a 40-37 win over they have a win over a ranked team. Because the thing about Wake Forest is they have 2 wins over teams with a winning record, or 3 wins over teams with winning record, because they have a win over Army, who's 4-3, and they have a win over Syracuse, who's 5-4, and then a win over Virginia, who's 6-3. But Virginia's resume is about to start looking really bad here soon because of what their schedule's coming up.
Right.
Those are not playoff, numbers. Cincinnati, an undefeated Cincinnati, would flat out have a much better resume than an undefeated Wake Forest.
You're right.
So that's why I say any
other year, like UNC would be a good win, right?
Clemson.
Clemson
yeah, because
would be
they
a
beat
good
Clemson.
win.
That's going to give Clemson at least four losses.
And at Boston College, if Phil Dracovic is healthy, that's a good win too at Boston College.
Right. And they've fallen apart since he got hurt.
For sure. No, absolutely. Like I said, any other year, I think that the home stretch for Wake Forest really puts them in the driver's seat. But this year, that's not the case. You know what I mean? Like, it's who would have guessed that would be the case? So that's just tough sledding for Wake Forest when it comes to strength of schedule.
Dan Muller with a super chat. Thank you for that, Dan. He says, I think Notre Dame will finish 5th in the playoff. I don't see Oregon losing to anyone else. Bama, Michigan State, Ohio State, no, you will take care of themselves. Thoughts? Well, kind of. I mean, that's kind of where we're going with the rest of the show. I do want to respond to one other thing. Why do some feel that the CFP is going to show some love to a group of 5? Daniel Wade says that. They haven't in the past. I don't get it. Here's the big difference. Cincinnati went out and did something that UCF never did. Right. They scheduled tough out of conference as best as they could. I mean, you know, if UCF would have had a win over a 2018 Notre Dame team, a one-loss Notre Dame team in 18 or 19 of those years where UCF was really good, they'd have been in.
Right.
But they didn't. They beat like Pitt and they'd play like Duke. I mean, they played nobody out of conference. Cincinnati went out and played 2 Power 5 teams out of conference and on the road and won both of them by double digits, right? So that's why Cincinnati has a much better shot, in my opinion, than UCF and BYU last year. They're not even in the same breath as BYU last year because they've actually played a much better schedule. So, but back to this conversation, Vince. So those are the teams that, to me, control their own destiny.
Sure.
I think you could make a case that Ohio State does as well. Because I have a hard time seeing an Ohio State team that wins out not getting in. But here's why I don't put them in there yet. If Georgia wins out, Oklahoma – so if Alabama wins out, and Georgia and Alabama both have a loss, I think they're both in over Ohio State. Would you agree with that?
Interesting. It just depends on how things go with Ohio State. If they punish Michigan and then they punish whoever's in the Big Ten championship, I think it's a conversation.
It's definitely conversation. Oh, it's definitely a conversation. But here's the thing. They're both going to have Georgia and Ohio and Alabama would have better wins than what Ohio State would have. Georgia's resume is going to be the best in the country because they've beaten so many good teams. Georgia's the only team, when I look at these 12, Georgia's 4-0 against teams that have a winning record. Unlike some of these other teams, like Wake Forest is 3-0, but it's like 4-3 Army, 5-4 Syracuse. They've beaten 6-2 Auburn. They've beaten 6-2 Kentucky. You know, Georgia has. They've beaten 5-3 Clemson, which isn't, that's not obviously that's the worst of their 4. And then I'm trying to remember what and then Arkansas. So, I mean, they've got legitimately great wins. If they win out and then lose a close game to Bama, the only way I would disagree with what I just said is if it's like a blowout. Bama just crushes them.
And here's my retort to that, I suppose, for Ohio State would be they would beat an undefeated Michigan State. They'd beat a one-loss Michigan
Assuming
team.
that Michigan State has that right.
And they should. I think they should. Mm-hmm. And obviously they beat Penn State as well, which – is that a good win?
It's not a good win yet. No.
Okay, fair enough.
Georgia's still going to have more good wins than Ohio State. Now, Ohio State will have 2 great wins, to your point. If Michigan wins out and Michigan State win out, except for their games against Ohio State.
Right.
2
right. And that's their
number 1 resumes.
And that's their 11th and 12th win of the season. Like 11th, 12th game of the season is Michigan State, Michigan, and then the Big Ten championship. So they could end with a flurry.
Which that won't be a great win because that's going to be Iowa or Minnesota, and neither of those teams are going to be any good.
That's fair.
But here's the thing. For Michigan State and Michigan to win out, they both have to beat Penn State, which makes Penn State a 7-5 team.
Right.
So that eliminates that as a big win.
Fair.
I also think when you look at Ohio State getting completely outplayed at home by Oregon compared to losing a close game to Bama in the SEC title game is going to look a lot different for me. And then I think also when you look at for example, Georgia's overall strength of schedule is 37-28. Ohio State's is 34-30. That's pretty good. The difference is if you take away Ohio State's record against teams they've beaten, it's now sub 500 because you take out 7-1 Oregon. Now all of a sudden they're 27-29. Now it's going to get better as the season goes on, but Georgia's still going to have a better strength of record and strength of schedule. In my opinion. So to me, Ohio State then gets into the situation of, okay, what happens when if it comes down to there's 3 spots locked up, right? So let's say Oklahoma wins out. Oregon and Ohio State both went out. That's where it gets really interesting. And I'm curious to see where Oregon and Ohio State both get ranked tonight. Because here's the thing, the committee, Vince, has always done a good job of looking at context. What's the context of a loss?
Right.
The team didn't have their
Absolutely.
starting quarterback, right? They did that with Clemson in 2017 because Kelly Bryant got knocked out of the Syracuse game. They lost to Syracuse, who was 4-8, but the committee was like, yeah, but their quarterback got knocked out. Oregon's only loss so far is a game where, like, the day before, their offensive coordinator is rushed to the hospital in an emergency surgery situation. They go lose at Stanford. They've been a different team, and then they struggled a little bit with Cal the next week when he wasn't fully go. But if you look at their schedule outside of that, Oregon has a much more impressive resume than a lot of people realize. When you look at they're 3-0 against teams with a winning record, and they have the best win of anybody right now in college football. A road win, a convincing road win over Ohio State. Nobody can match that win right now.
I agree with that.
The other thing about Oregon, too, is down the stretch, they don't play a tough schedule because you can't play a tough schedule when you're in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
But they do play some good teams in the Pac-12 down the stretch. So right now, Oregon's strength of schedule or opponent record is 27-31. But they've beaten a Fresno State team that right now is 7-2. They beat a 7-1 top 10 Ohio State team, and they beat a UCLA team with a winning record. Okay. Then they have to play Washington, who's 4-4, has won 2 in a row. They're not that good. But Washington State's now 5-4 and has won 4 of their last 5 games. Okay. And they have a bye week. Then Utah is now 5-3. They've won 4 out of 5. And then they have at Stanford, at Arizona. So there's a good chance that Utah is now 7-3 by the time they play Oregon. And then Oregon State's 5-3. They have Colorado on the road, who stinks, and then home against Stanford and Arizona State. Those are winnable games. At worst, they're 7-4. At best, they're 8-3.
So all of a sudden, that strength of schedule starts getting a little bit stronger for Oregon.
And so Ohio State will have a better overall resume, but that now we're going to find out how the committee views head-to-head, because it's not just that Oregon beat them. They beat them convincingly.
Yes,
they led the entire game, and it was on the road.
Yeah.
And there's no context of, well, Ohio State was missing this player or that player or anything like that.
First game of the year.
Oregon didn't have Kayvon Thibodeau in that game.
Yeah, that's a good point. He was the best.
Their 2 best defensive players didn't even play.
Yeah, exactly.
And they still beat Oregon. So that's going to be the really interesting one for me. Now, what we're doing with all of this is we're talking about but the way this season has gone, there's going to be a lot of chaos.
Yeah.
So let's kind of go through this, Vince. We have a top 12 of where our rankings would be. We believe that there's 2 SEC teams with a chance of the playoff. That's it, right? Now, that could get expanded if there's like utter chaos. So like
that'd be a lot.
Auburn loses a game, if Georgia loses a game and then Auburn beats Bama and then Auburn beats Georgia in a rematch in the SEC title game, then you could see a 2-loss. It'd have to be like crazy stuff going on. Right. So you look at it and you say, okay, where's our 12? We're going to do our 12, and then we're going to talk about Notre Dame. So our 12 is we believe there's 2 SEC teams with a shot, right? There's 3 Big Ten teams right now with a shot: Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State. There's 1 Pac-12 team with a shot. That's Oregon. There's 1 ACC team with a shot. That's Wake Forest. There are 3 Big 12 teams with a shot, in my opinion. Now, only 1 has a great shot. That's Oklahoma. Yeah. But I do believe 1 loss Baylor, 1 loss Oklahoma State also both have a shot should they run the table. And then, of course, non-Power 5 of the 5 conferences, you have Notre Dame, who has an opportunity, and then Cincinnati. That's our 12. So, Vince, let's go with our number 12 team. Who do you have as the number 12 team?
Oklahoma State.
Okay. And then 11 is Baylor?
Yeah, those 2 are interchangeable to me right now.
I have Oklahoma State ahead because Oklahoma State beat Baylor in a head-to-head.
Okay,
so
fair enough.
I have Oklahoma State 11, Baylor 12. I actually think both of those teams have a shot to win out because when you look at their remaining schedules, obviously they both play Oklahoma. Oklahoma State plays at Texas Tech, who has a winning record right now. I actually think Baylor might have a better shot, or Baylor might have a better shot if they went out and Oklahoma State loses to Oklahoma, because they'd beat Oklahoma, but they still got to play at Kansas State. And Kansas State's making some noise right now. When Skylar Thompson plays for Kansas State at quarterback, they're a good football team.
Sure.
Most of their losses when he was either out or just coming back from injury. So that'll be an interesting one. But it's going to be tough for a non-Oklahoma team to make the playoff. A lot of things are going to have to happen for one of those two teams to get
Absolutely.
in. Number 10, who do you have?
Number 10, I got Wake Forest.
Okay, so do I. Again, I could see the committee putting them higher because they're undefeated, but I don't know what you're building their resume around.
Right.
Now.
I try to think head to head. Like as I was going through this list, I was like, okay, would so-and-so beat so-and-so on a neutral field? Like that kind of thing was in my head as
the committee will do that.
Yeah. That's how I was trying to put this together. Not necessarily best wins, best losses, undefeated. Like if they played each other, who's going to win?
And I think the thing it's going to hurt Wake Forest is I actually felt in September, I had a different view of it. Part of the reason I backed off my if Wake wins out, they're in thing is because when I made that, they had a blowout win over Virginia. They had a blowout win over Florida State. They were smacking teams. Their last 4 games, they blew out Duke, who stinks. But then Army 70-56 is not going to look good on your resume. 40-37 at Syracuse, 37-34 win over Louisville. These aren't good teams, and you're giving up a lot of points to those teams. I mean, Notre Dame fans are losing their ever-loving minds about giving up 34 points to North Carolina, which is 3 points below their season scoring average. And Wake Forest gave up 37 to Syracuse, 34 to Louisville,
right,
56 to Army.
To Army, who runs the triple option. Like, how are you giving up 56 to a team that runs triple? But whatever.
It can't stop anybody.
Poor tackling is the answer.
And Army, before that, Army had scored 56 against Connecticut, 43 against Georgia State, but then they were 14 against Wisconsin, 16 against Ball State, 23 against Miami of Ohio. This isn't a juggernaut offense. So, number 9, who do you have at number 9? I think this is where we're going to disagree a little bit.
I have the Meat Chickens at 9.
I have Notre Dame at 9.
Okay.
I have Michigan at 8. Do you have Notre Dame at 8?
Just flipped.
The reason I went Michigan at 8 is, number 1, Michigan has a better resume. I mean, I hate to say it. It makes me want to kind of barf as I say it.
The only thing that's better about their resume to me is their loss.
No.
Everything else, I disagree.
Well, they have 3 wins over teams with a winning record. Notre Dame has 2. When you look at Notre Dame played a 4-4 MAC team and beat them by 3. Michigan's played 2 MAC teams that are 6-2, or one's 5-3, one's 6-2, and they blew both of them out. I think when you look at it, because to me, the committee will look at how you won games, and the reality is Notre Dame's won a bunch of ugly games. They just have. They haven't really blown anybody out. The best win that Notre Dame has is over Wisconsin. Would you agree?
Correct. But Notre Dame will never blow any teams out, ever.
Right.
That's just not what they do.
Well, I mean, but yeah, they do. I mean, they beat New Mexico 66-14 a couple years ago. Bowling Green 59-0. They should have beat Toledo by 17 to 20 points, right? But you look at Michigan's resume, right? Michigan beat Wisconsin by 21. Notre Dame beat them by 28. But you and I both know the committee just doesn't look at the score. Michigan outplayed Wisconsin for 4 quarters. Notre Dame was losing to Wisconsin at the beginning of the 4th quarter. They was a much more competitive game on a neutral field. Michigan went to Wisconsin and blew Wisconsin out from start to finish. That's going to matter. I think when you also look at Michigan and the game they lost, Michigan played much better. Not only did they lose to a better team on the road, they played much better than Notre Dame did. Notre Dame never led against Cincinnati. They trailed the whole game. They trailed by double digits almost the whole game. But I also think when you look at what they did to the MAC teams, those are 2 good MAC teams, right? And they blew them out 63-10 and 47-14. Notre Dame beat a 4-4 MAC team 32-29. And so I think that factors in. So I think overall their resume is just better. Again, I hate to say it because I hate Michigan, but I got to be honest. And the reality is right now I think their resume is better. It's not going to matter in the end, because I think Ohio State's going to beat the crap out of Michigan. I do. But right now I have to give Michigan the edge.
That's fine. And I don't have a problem with that. I think we're splitting hairs because it's 8-9. Like,
right.
It's not like 5-4. You know what I mean?
But it matters because if they both went out, Notre Dame would have to leap them despite playing a worse record.
It's not going to matter because they're not going to win out.
I don't think so either.
And number 2, again, I go back to if they played on the field, I feel like Notre Dame wins that game. That's
maybe, but I think if you're going to use the statistical analysis that they would use to determine that, I don't think you could make that case looking at it from a committee standpoint. But we'll see.
Right.
Number 7, who you got?
Oregon.
Okay, you have Oregon behind Ohio State.
I do.
Okay,
Like 2 spots behind Ohio State, actually.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah,
so explain to me why.
Because I don't think, number one, I think that Ohio State's history is going to matter. I just think it will. I think it will.
But the committee has never factored that in.
I'm just telling. I can almost guarantee you that Ohio State will be ranked higher than Oregon when the thing comes out tonight.
We'll see.
And I'll eat crow if I'm wrong. That's fine.
We'll have a little. We'll have a little side bet on it.
That's fine.
Sandwich.
I just don't. I don't think that Oregon's schedule over in the Pac-12 can hold a candle to the Big Ten right now.
Yeah, but Ohio State won't have a win that comes anywhere close to the best win that Oregon has.
Which is them.
Right. That has to matter. I mean, when you go on the road without your 2 best defensive players, Ohio State's not missing anybody, and you beat them convincingly for 4 quarters.
I get it.
And you're just going to negate all that because you think the Pac-12 sucks.
I think the committee is going to think that the Pac-12 sucks, and I think that they're gonna ding Oregon for that reason.
Yeah, because then you have to sit there and say, okay, where are they? How are they going to view the Ohio State game? Are they just going to dismiss it?
I don't know. I don't think they're going to dismiss it, but they've ranked, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but they've absolutely had teams that have lost to other teams, below or higher,
Yeah, but they usually end up putting them, because remember they had TCU ahead of Baylor in 2014, even though Baylor beat TCU, but then in the final thing they put Baylor ahead of them because of head-to-head. But usually like they had Ohio State ahead of Penn State, even though Penn State beat Ohio State, but they didn't have the same number of losses. Like, this is the thing that everybody says to me. They're like, well, not you, Vince, because this is an argument you're making. Well, so, hey, look, Penn State beat Ohio State head-to-head, and yet Ohio State got in. Ohio State had 1 loss, Penn State had 2.
Right.
Penn State lost twice early.
I get that. I get all that. Yeah.
So to me, because when I look at Ohio State and you say, okay, well, they're going to think the Big Ten's better. Okay, that's fine. But Ohio State hasn't beaten any of the good Big Ten teams yet. Right?
That's fair.
I mean, what's Ohio State hanging their hat on right now? A win over Minnesota? A game they were losing until Minnesota's best running back goes out? Penn State, who's lost like 3-4 games in a row, 3 games in a row. So I think if you're correct and Ohio State gets in over Oregon, it will be because Ohio State leaps them later, in my opinion.
That's fair. And I get that. I totally get that. My argument will be, I think we're going to learn a lot about this committee
tonight.
Because
before all this stuff shakes out, 100%.
Absolutely. 100%. Now, at the end, when it's all said and done, I think Ohio State gets it. Everybody really wants you to eat that thing.
I know, right? So
somebody predicted what was on your sandwich earlier. Hold on. Let me find it. It's way up there because people have been talking about this for a while.
Yeah, so we're getting into these really thoughtful conversations about the college football playoff, and everyone is just talking meatball parm.
John Long.
No.
I'm guessing he's a club guy. Ham, turkey, add bacon, then lettuce and mayo.
I hate mayo. I'm I get very plain stuff on sandwiches. Like, if I get like a cheeseburger, it's just going to literally have just cheese and maybe lettuce. I don't like mustard, ketchup, mayo, none of that stuff. It's just tuna fish. Tuna with provolone and lettuce. That's it. Yeah. Ooh. I like tuna fish. But hey, we're doing this remotely, so it's not like you got to smell my tuna breath after I eat it. So Vince, I have Cincinnati 7.
Okay.
Because when I look at the overall resume, I see Cincinnati's even with a win over 7-1 Notre Dame, Cincinnati's opponent record is 24-32. And then when I look at Ohio State, their opponent record is 34-30. And then when I look at Oregon's opponent record is 27-31. Oregon is also 3-0 against teams with a plus 500 record, which is something the committee looks at. That ties them with Ohio State, Michigan for the most, behind Georgia, of course. Is that because I said earlier Georgia has 4. Cincinnati has 2. Notre Dame, which is a great win, and then 5-3 Central Florida. So to me, that's why I have Cincinnati a little lower. I'm really curious to see what the committee does. Because one thing the committee has done, they don't do what the polls do, which is just like there's some guy for Fox Sports named RJ Young who like puts everything on like record, and like so he'll have like an undefeated team that stinks, like number 4 over like Bama, something crazy. Like saw something crazy.
Well,
like
that's what Stoops did on the Fox show, their pregame show. They were kind of going through like their top teams, and he put all the undefeated teams like 1 through 6, and then everybody else. He's like, oh no, it's hard to win in college football. That is such a coach talking. That's such a head coach, because winning is hard in college football. I get that, and he totally just had all 6 undefeated teams going into Saturday 1 through 6. Like, that's probably not how it's going to go, Bob.
Yes, winning is hard in college football, but if you're Alabama playing against Cincinnati's schedule, you're undefeated. And you haven't had a game with 30 points.
Yeah.
So to me, the committee's never done that. The committee looks at overall resume.
Absolutely.
And now Wake Forest and Cincinnati don't have that. Now, here's the thing. If they're going to give Cincinnati a big jump because of their win over Notre Dame, then I think Notre Dame will be higher than 9. Like if Cincinnati's higher than 7, then Notre Dame will be higher than 9.
They'll drag Notre Dame up with them. I mean, because if you're ranking Cincinnati that high, then that must mean you respect what Notre Dame's doing. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yep. So
I'm writing yours down next to mine. So you've got Cincinnati 7. I'm assuming since we just went toe to toe about Oregon and Ohio State, that you've got Oregon 5 and Ohio State 6.
I do. Okay. I do. Now I think Ohio State has a chance to leap Oregon down the stretch, and the thing that's killed Oregon is Arizona State falling back. Because the best hope that they had, and really they still have hope. Like they need Utah to keep winning. They need Oregon State to keep winning.
Oh, absolutely.
But Arizona State was the team that at the time had a shot because they were a 1-loss team and they had lost to BYU. But Arizona State has really fallen off in recent games. And so they have 2 losses. So now all of a sudden and the reason I bring that up is because the hope is that, one of those South teams ends up ranked in the top 25, and then you beat one of those teams in the Pac-12 championship. But I'm looking at it right now, and there's not a single team in the South with fewer than 3 losses. And you can say, well, Utah could win out, but they can't win out because they play Oregon. So there's only a chance for one Pac-12 South team to have 3 losses, and that's Arizona State. And if Arizona State wins out, they play – oh, that's South Florida. I don't know why it went to South Florida. Trying to get to Arizona State. They play USC at home, at Washington, at Oregon State, home against Arizona. I don't see them jumping into the top 25 with that, unless what the committee has done in the past is they will jump a team into the top 25 to set up a team that they like in the top 10. They just have.
Because they don't care. Once you get past 10, they don't care where you're. It doesn't matter. It will matter to them because it'll prop somebody else up. Like that's all that matters. And I get, you know what? Okay. You can do that.
Yep. So I have Oregon 5.
Yep.
My 4 is I have Bama 4. Who's your 4?
Michigan State.
Okay.
I have Michigan State 4, and I know they're undefeated, and I know Bama has a loss,
and and Michigan State has a better win than Bama has.
They do. I still, again, it's the head-to-head thing in my head.
Yeah, but that can't trump everything else, though. Because otherwise, you could advocate for having a 2-loss Georgia team in the playoff a couple years ago. At some point in time, resume has to trump who you think is a better team,
and that's fine. At the end of the year, then it would trump it for me. But right now,
so you're just going to leave Bama ahead of them until the final poll, and then you just randomly put Michigan.
It would be random. I would sneak them around depending on how things are going. But this is how I would do the first one. Absolutely.
I think at some point in time you have to be able to say, look, you have to give a team credit for
at some point
what they've done, not what you think. Because otherwise you're going to have Bama in the play. I mean, even the year that Bama didn't make it with 2 losses, you can make a case that they could still beat 2 or 3 of the teams in the college football playoff.
Right.
So I just can't just keep putting them in because
2 losses, you're done. Like you're out.
Right.
2 losses, you're out. 1 loss, we can have a conversation.
But
2 losses, you're done.
But here's the thing: if they lose to Georgia and they have 2 losses, that doesn't change that they would beat Michigan State head to head.
But now you have 2 losses, and so you're out for me. That's
so what you're saying is the resume is more important than who you think would win head to head, and that's where I'm coming from. Because to me, when I look at Michigan State.
I use both.
Michigan State went on the road and beat a top 10 team, a team that you and I think is either going to be 8 or 9, right? In Michigan.
to start
And
with. Yeah.
when you look at the rest of their schedule, the other thing I like about Michigan State is I also think how you beat people matters. So when I look at a Michigan State team, and they blew out Northwestern, blew out Miami on the road, blew out Rutgers, and they've got a couple ugly wins too. Just like Bama's got a couple wins. That Florida win by 3 is not looking so great right now. But I also look at the fact that Bama didn't lose to me a real good team. I don't think Texas A&M's that good. I really don't. And that's the thing for me. And they got outplayed that game. I mean, for 4 quarters, they got outplayed by Texas A&M. So I have Bama 4, but I went Michigan State ahead because I just think Michigan State right now has a much better resume. I think Alabama could probably beat them head to head. But you could say that about Alabama every single year and put them in the playoff. So to me, that's why I'm going to go with Michigan State 3 and Alabama 4. But at the end of the day, it won't matter. They're both going to be in.
Right.
If they both went out.
Absolutely correct.
So,
yes.
Number 2, this surprises me. I'm surprised. Who do you have number 2?
Oklahoma.
Okay, that surprises me. I do too. I just people have been dinging Oklahoma all year. They keep winning, and they've gotten better and better since Caleb Williams took over.
Yes, and that's my biggest thing is he had one bad half of football, and I will agree with that. But that was it was either his first or second start of the season. Because he came in relief and did really well. And then I think it might have been his first start. I can't remember, but it was bad. It was bad half of football. No question. You're on the road against Kansas and you stunk. I mean, but he's a true freshman. So there's a little bit of just like I give a little bit of a pass to Joe Alt, I'm going to give a little bit of a pass to a true freshman quarterback on the road in a kind of hostile environment. I mean, Kansas opened up, their tickets. After halftime, they didn't even take tickets anymore. They just said anybody that's within shouting distance, come on in to fill up that stadium. So it became a hostile environment, right? And so I give him a little bit of a pass for that. But other than that, he's been just killing people. And they have been doing a great job, Oklahoma has. And they're leaving no question about their wins. And so they're undefeated. They've won with style. They've got a pretty decent defense this year, and they've got a dynamic quarterback. You're number 2.
Yeah. Now, for me, I'm going to use the argument for Oklahoma that you used for Alabama. And the reason I will is because they are undefeated. So I think Oklahoma would beat Michigan State. That's why I have them ahead. Even though Michigan State's resume is better, I still would go with Oklahoma because the Oklahoma has more wins because they've played more games. They're 9-0 compared to 8-0. But I think that Oklahoma is a better team than Michigan State. And when you have the same number of losses, I think that argument holds more water for me. That's my thing.
Oh, I get that.
And we saw that with Penn State and Michigan State or Penn State and Ohio State back in 2016. Penn State clearly could beat Ohio State in a head-to-head, but they had more losses than Ohio State did. So Ohio State made the playoff. So that's why right now that's where I would be. But I won't be shocked if the committee has Alabama higher. It's because it's Alabama. But that's not where I would have them, right?
Right. And that's why I make the argument for Ohio State, because I think they're going to have them higher because they're Ohio State. I just feel like that's
you could be right about where the committee has them, but this ranking is where we have them.
Fair. That's fair.
So not so much a prediction,
that's a good point. Yeah,
more of where we have them.
That's a good point. That's a good point, sir.
So number 1 obviously is Georgia, and if you would have had anyone other than Georgia, we would have had like a temporary, I don't know what happened to Vince's connection. I don't know. I don't know why his password was revoked right now. So I don't understand that one. So Vince, let's talk a little bit about Notre Dame, because I think as we kind of wrap this conversation up, the reason that I said to people, whether you like it or not, Notre Dame has a shot at the college football playoff. Because they just do. I mean, again, this isn't a great Notre Dame team, but they just do. There's been so much chaos in college football this year.
Right.
I mean, like Ohio State in 2014, weren't they like 16th in the first ranking?
Were they
something
really?
like that? Yeah, they were like 16th in the first ranking. I'm going to look that up as we're talking. But they had one loss, right?
Right.
But now you get past 12. The only teams with fewer than one loss are teams that are like Texas, San Antonio, teams like that. There aren't SMU. I mean, it's teams like that. There's no great teams this year. It's been such a chaotic year. I've seen things like it's like 19 teams that were ranked in the top 25 at one point in time
Right.
have lost. And it's just I'm looking it up now. It's Ohio State was ranked 16th. And that year you got down to number 17 before you got to a team with 2 losses.
Crazy. That's
absolutely nuts. It's not possible this year unless you're going to have a bunch of SMUs and Texas San Antonio's, and they're not going to have UTSA ranked high. They're not, just for the same reason they did have BYU ranked high last year, because they haven't played anybody.
Yeah,
they shouldn't be in this conversation, and they're not going to be in our conversation.
Absolutely.
So this has been the ACC has one team left with fewer than 2 losses. The Pac-12 has one team left with fewer than 2 losses. Actually, let me look at this real quick. The Pac-12 has only one team left with fewer than 3 losses. That's it. Every team in the Pac-12 other than Oregon has at least 3 losses, and there's only 3 teams with 3 losses. Everybody else has 4 or more. It's insane. It's been an insane year. There's only one team with fewer than 2 losses in the ACC, and as I look at it here, there's only 2 teams with 2 losses. Right? It's been a crazy year. Like right now, there's only 2 teams in the SEC with fewer than 2 losses. That's it. Just 2. Everybody else has 2 or more losses. So that's why I say, look, Notre Dame is in this whether you like it or not.
Absolutely.
Then let's look at the remaining schedules. Georgia plays at Tennessee, at Georgia Tech, and home against Missouri in no particular order, plus Alabama. So barring them just getting colossally upset by Tennessee, which could happen. I'm not predicting it, but Tennessee can score enough, in my opinion. Alabama plays LSU, New Mexico State, Arkansas, and then at Auburn. So there's a potential loss there for Alabama. Michigan State's remaining schedule, it might be the toughest of any of them.
Absolutely. They'll have a chance to prove who they are.
Every team they play moving forward has a winning record as of today. They play at 5-3 Purdue, home against 5-3 Maryland, at Ohio State, and then home against Penn State. Ohio State plays at Nebraska, home against Purdue, home against Michigan State, at Michigan. There's a potential loss in there for them. Plus, they would play either Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Iowa in the Big Ten title game, which the Big Ten West this year stinks.
Terrible.
Michigan plays home against Indiana, at Penn State, at Maryland, home against Ohio State. So that's where I say the Big Ten. The Big Ten better be careful because they could end up with nobody in the college football playoff.
Very easily.
Nobody. I mean, because they could all end up with 2 losses.
Ohio State takes 1 L between Michigan and Michigan State. And then, Michigan State takes an L from somebody. You know what I mean?
There's 4 teams left on their schedule that can beat them.
No question. I'm going to have to sit and think hard about whether I'm going to call for the Purdue upset, to be perfectly honest with you.
I've had several people. We've had people in here like that have talked about that.
Right.
Oklahoma's path is challenging. They have a bye this week because they've played 9 games already. They're at Baylor, home against Iowa State, at Oklahoma State, and then they're going to have a rematch against either Baylor or Oklahoma State.
As I say, Baylor and Oklahoma State, and then a 3rd time. So the 3 times you've got a potential to lose.
And 4 times. Iowa State at home is no slouch. Iowa State has given Oklahoma several games and have beaten them twice in the last 5 years.
Nice if Iowa State would step up and help us out here.
I know, right? They're 5-3 right now, but that's the other thing too is Oklahoma's got control because the final 4 teams they play are all going to have winning records.
Yes.
All going to have winning records.
No doubt.
Oklahoma State plays at West Virginia, home against TCU, at Texas Tech. Don't sleep on that game. And then they play home against Oklahoma. Is at TCU, home against Oklahoma, at Kansas State, home against Texas Tech. So the Big 12 is going to eat itself. There's only going to be one team with a shot here pretty soon, and that's Oklahoma. Oregon, we talked about their schedule earlier. Home games because Washington State and Oregon State, at Washington and at Utah. Wake Forest, this is what's going to kill Wake Forest. They play Pitt, who's 6-2. If they beat Pitt, now all of a sudden Pitt's 6-3, and that's not a good win at all.
Right.
At Virginia Tech, who's 4-4 right now. Home against Louisville, who's 4-4. Home against Miami, who's 4-4. And then they're going to play the winner of the Coastal. So maybe a rematch against Pitt, which would then give Pitt a 4th loss. Cincinnati plays Tulsa, who stinks. At South Florida, who stinks. Then they're home against SMU, who's good. And then if the committee wants, we're going to know how bad the committee wants at Cincinnati in the playoff by where they rank Notre Dame. First of all, where they rank Cincinnati, where they rank Notre Dame, and where they rank SMU. If SMU is like 20 to 25, it tells me they don't think much of Cincinnati. If you see SMU like 15 to 20, it's telling me that they're hyping up SMU to try to give Cincinnati a big win.
So there's a conversation going on over here in the chat. I wanted to ask you your opinion, right? So if Cincinnati, let's say Cincinnati loses to SMU, okay, Notre Dame wins out. They're both 11-1, and then obviously Cincinnati is going to have the championship game for their league, so they're going to end up being 12-1, where Notre Dame's 11-1. Who do you rank higher?
It would depend on how Notre Dame plays down the stretch.
Okay,
for me.
So it's Notre Dame. It'd be a resume thing over head-to-head.
Yeah, it would have to be, because I think Notre Dame's going to have a significantly tougher strength of schedule. And that's why I said Notre Dame's opponents have a 37-27 record. Cincinnati's have a 24-32 record, and that's only going to get worse because they play Tulsa, who is 2-6. They play South Florida, who is, let me go pull up the AAC here. Tulsa is 3-5. South Florida is 2-6. Then they play SMU, who's 7-1, and then they play at East Carolina, who's 4-4. And then they would have an AAC title game against either Houston or SMU. Right now, if they beat SMU, it would end up being Houston, I believe. So that would give them a good win. So we're going to find out where SMU and Houston really are both ranked to set up Cincinnati.
Sure.
I just don't think Cincinnati's going to run a table. I don't. I think they're going to lose to one of those teams. Here's the other problem: if they lose to SMU, that like they're better off getting upset by Tulsa this weekend and then beating SMU than the other way around. Right. In my opinion,
it's the schedule. That's my issue. If they both have a loss, it's the schedule for Cincinnati. It doesn't matter head to head.
Right.
It just doesn't. Cincinnati has proven that they're not a great team over and week after week after week. They've proven it to me. And the committee's just going to wait for that first loss for Cincinnati. As soon as they get that first loss, they're going to plummet. They're going to plummet. And I think they're going to end up being behind Notre Dame as well.
Right. I'm just not sold on Cincinnati. Their resume is not impressive outside of that Notre Dame game. And I think here's the thing for me for Notre Dame, though. Notre Dame has to blow out their last three teams, four opponents. They have to. They're going to have a head-to-head with Navy, right? They have to blow Navy out. If they beat Navy in a similar fashion to Cincinnati, then you have no argument at that point in time. You can't use the whole "we had a bad day" against Cincinnati, because Notre Dame played like crap against Cincinnati. They played worse than they did in any other game, and some of it was Cincinnati, but a lot of it was just Notre Dame not playing well. But when you look at it at the end of the day, the committee is always going to look at head-to-head, but they're also, because we made that point about Oregon and Ohio State, the difference is the resume for Cincinnati relative to Notre Dame is going to be a whole lot different than Oregon and Ohio State, because those are similar resumes. Ohio State's is better, but they're similar resumes. Cincinnati's going to have to run the table, in my opinion. And people can say, "Oh, they beat Notre Dame," whatever. The reality is that's the committee always looks at the overall. It's why they had TCU ranked ahead of Baylor for so long in 2014. I think the only reason they put Baylor ahead of TCU is to justify Ohio State being in there. That's what I felt. But at the end of the day, Cincinnati has got the Notre Dame win and then not a whole lot else. And it's not their fault. The ACC's down. Memphis is down. UCF is down. Indiana's underachieved. But here's the difference. If Notre Dame wins out, but they keep winning the way that they're winning now, they won't leap Cincinnati, nor should they. Because how you're playing matters.
Sure.
And if you're just, it's that I made earlier with Notre Dame compared to Michigan. If Notre Dame beats Navy by a touchdown, beats Georgia Tech by 10, beats Virginia by 4 on the road, and then beats Stanford by a touchdown, those are 4 mediocre to bad teams. And you have a whole season of winning ugly.
Sure.
I don't think the committee is going to be impressed by that. Just like they weren't impressed by that in 2019 when Notre Dame blew out a bunch of crap teams. Remember that? And the committee had them they weren't even in the top 10 that year with 2 losses. So I think that they're going to have to blow their next 4 opponents out. They have to have that common opponent convincing victory.
Right.
If they're going to be able to say, hey, we had a bad day against Cincinnati. So that's kind of thing. But for Notre Dame to get in, I think the easiest thing is to have Cincinnati lose twice. They need Cincinnati to lose
absolutely.
a couple games.
It's possible that they could lose twice in the championship and possibly
Like they could lose
against
to SMU and then Houston. I don't think it's likely,
Right.
but they're going to lose one though. But then they need like, to me, if you're a Notre Dame fan and you actually want the team in the playoff, you need to root for Georgia to win out
because it eliminates Alabama immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
You also need for the Big Ten, which we are all kind of pulling for this anyway. You need for the Big Ten to have chaos. Meaning, what I mean by that is, I think there's a chance if Georgia wins out, they're in. Oklahoma wins out, they're in. Then we get to these next few. I think if Michigan State, let's say Michigan State loses to Ohio State in a close game and then beats everybody else, Michigan State finishes 11-1, Ohio State goes 12-1. Michigan State would deserve to be in over Notre Dame based on their resume, in my opinion, if they lose a close game to Ohio State.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I agree.
They need Michigan State to lose twice, right? Or they need Michigan State to win out and then Ohio State's out. Because if Michigan State wins out, Ohio State's out because they will beat Ohio State.
Right.
And then you need Ohio State to beat Michigan, which I think we're all fans of, right? And so that's kind of where you need the chaos to happen.
They would both have 2 losses, and Michigan State would obviously be in as probably the number 2 seed, right, I would think, in the Final Four.
Or you need Ohio State to win out and knock Michigan State out, and then Michigan State
wins out. If Michigan State wins out, they're number 2, and I don't care if Oklahoma wins out; they'd be number 3 for me.
Yeah, because they would have a much better resume at that point in time. They would have a win over Ohio State. They'd have a win over Michigan.
Right.
And then they'd have a win over a ranked Big
so
Ten
number
West
2.
team.
They would be number 2 for me, and an undefeated Oklahoma would be number 3. And then I think you're having a pretty good debate about who number 4 would be. Yeah. If that's the way things went down.
But for Notre Dame, they need a lot to happen.
Oh, yeah.
A lot to happen.
Absolutely. And I don't anticipate it happening at all.
Yeah.
But it's still inside the realm of possibility.
And they need Oregon to lose as well. They need Oregon to lose a game because they're not getting in over a 1-loss Oregon team.
Each week, Saturday morning, you're going to have to tell me who I need to root for.
Well, that's one of the things I'm going to do is once the playoff thing comes out, I do sort of a
That's
Notre
right. You
Dame
did that
rooting
last
guide.
year.
Yeah. Like a Notre Dame rooting guide for if you want Notre Dame to be in the playoff, here's the things you need to happen. And if you want Notre Dame to win a championship, then you really need teams like Michigan State to pull off upsets to where Ohio State gets knocked out, Bama gets knocked out, right?
Absolutely.
That's really where you want to be. So we're going to have that on Fridays. That's going to be a fun thing to do. Those are always fun putting together because it's like, so much of what I do is like real strict analysis and all this, but sometimes it's fun to just kind of do the fantasy land stuff. And that's what that ultimately is. So